The one thing I thought would be interested regarding Capernaum, the village of Nahum, which was already revealed, I thought it would be interesting to look at the kind of world that, the kind of town that Jesus would have lived in. Don't forget, Jesus came to do what? Who was it he came to heal?
For the Jews.
The sick.
For the sick.
Basically sinners. So if you wanted sinners, this was the place to find them. Not this circle here, but the city of Capernaum. Primarily a Jewish population, connected by constant maritime traffic. I mean, obviously, with all the boats and commerce coming in, people from all walks of life. It was basically trying. You had Jewish people trying to follow the Mosaic law, but real interest was that what threw everything off the rails was that you had a Roman garrison at the boundaries of Capernaum. So try to imagine what this is like. You've got the Jews trying to obey the Mosaic laws, trying to be respectful of people, men trying to be respectful of women. But how would that have been thrown off if you have these coarse, ungodly Roman soldiers mixing with everything? You can imagine the kind of comments they would have made. You can imagine the coarseness they would have brought in. So you had this incredible mixture of people always around, and you always had merchants landing here, so from other countries. So you had a community trying to be good Jews, and pagans constantly throwing that askew. We also know, of course, that this is the heart of what became Jesus' mission triangle, along with Bethsaida and Chorazin. Thank you for that enthusiasm. Capernaum was an affluent place, prosperous from a trade in basalt. Yeah, I looked that up too because I know what it was, because they were telling me what basalt is. A type of volcano rock. I knew it was on yours. But they also sold it olive oil and wine. But more than this, as you can well imagine, Capernaum was known for its large, prosperous fishing industry. And I did find, and John mentioned the catfish, and I found that interesting because you always think of that as southern. So, but the catfish can only be caught at the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. That is not true. It's another bad joke that sunk. Evidence of its wealth is everywhere, particularly in the reliefs where you find vine, grapes, and figs. Huge Roman presence at Capernaum, as I said. And of course, what got the Jewish people the most riled up? What kind of people that were prominent here would get the Jews most riled up? The tax collectors, especially the Jews who became tax collectors, because the Jews would look at them as traitors to their own people. They charged exorbitant prices, especially to the fishermen. The fishermen would come in the early mornings after heavy catch, and the tax collectors would be right there to greet them almost. And it was miserable. It was a miserable life. You couldn't keep what you had. And so, of course, and when a Jew became a tax collector, it was like being a traitor. And of all the tax collectors Jesus could have taken, he made sure to take a Jewish tax collector. Of course, he came for the Jewish people. Among the other, again, to walk down the streets of Capernaum would be to find a city filled with Arab caravans, Jewish businessmen, Roman soldiers, and the general townspeople. There was a constant flow of traffic in the streets, very bustling village. I mean, tons of stuff. You would have probably had to shout about above the roar to have a conversation. Yeah, just in general, you could just see why this was so fit a town for Jesus to come in. I mean, you had everything. And Jesus did have interaction with the Romans as well, even though he came to the lost sheep of Israel. And there was definitely a sick people, sick from sin, who needed him. And the one thing I was worried about, and I'll wrap it up with this, who was the, probably one of the major officials we know by name from Capernaum? Has to do a story regarding his daughter. Jairus. Now, he was not a rabbi. He was the head of the synagogue. Synagogues at the time, besides being houses of prayer, were also the main gathering places. People would gather for civil affairs as well, and the synagogue leader would gather over that, would lead that. And the thing I found so interesting with Jairus as I thought about him. And you know, Jesus is present here. And don't forget, he wasn't like, oh, can we catch him? When's he going to be here? He was very evident here. He preached in the Capernaum synagogue often. And you know, he must have totally divided the people. I mean, the arguments that must have gone on regarding Jesus. Those who believed him and those who doubted him. And of course, the biggest problem was there any question among anyone of whether his miracles were authentic or not? What was the issue with them?
On the Sabbath.
What?
Some of them on the Sabbath.
Besides that, it wasn't the fact that he committed them. What was the real argument about Jesus?
Who was giving him the power?
Where the power was coming from. Was it coming from Satan or from... So you can imagine how this would have torn people apart. And that's whenever I read the story of Jairus' daughter, I always think him, I mean, he would have been a bigwig in the synagogue. What would have been his role in that? What would have been his role in the argument? How can he have possibly denied? And we don't know if the girl got saved, if Jairus got saved, but how could you not? Because his daughter, when he went to find Jesus, was as good as dead. By the time they got there, she was dead. And he saw with his own eyes that he raised her from the dead. So I've got to imagine Jairus would have become a disciple, although I can't say it for sure. And when these arguments were ongoing, what his role would have been. Would he have sat back and been neutral? Chicken? Or would he have spoke forth what he knew was correct? And that's Capernaum.